The Emperor's fatal miscalculation. The crystalline spires of the Galactic Council's central chamber pierced the purple sky of Nexus Prime, their surfaces reflecting the light of 3 setting suns. Inside, Emperor Azrael's shadow steel throne dominated the vast circular chamber, its dark surface absorbing light rather than reflecting it. The Emperor himself sat motionless, his silver-scaled skin catching the last rays of daylight that filtered through the chamber's transparent dome. Another failed attempt at subjugation, Azrael's voice carried a hint of weariness as he addressed the assembled council members. How many times must we teach these humans their place in the cosmic order? High Counselor Verthak, his tentacles writhing with barely contained frustration, projected a holographic display of Earth's latest expansion efforts. They've established 17 new colonies in the past solar cycle alone, Your Majesty. Their rate of technological advancement continues to exceed our projections. The chamber erupted in murmurs of concern. Humanity's resilience had become more than an irritation, it was now a genuine threat to the Galactic Council's authority. For millennia, the Council had maintained order through a careful balance of technological superiority and diplomatic manipulation. But humans, these upstart creatures from a backwater solar system, refused to submit to this natural order. Azrael's eyes narrowed as he studied the holographic display. "Show me their military leadership," he commanded. The image shifted, revealing profiles of Earth's top commanders. One face dominated the display, General Anthony Marshall, Supreme Commander of Earth's Combined Defense Forces. This one, Azrael's finger traced the holographic outline of Marshall's face. "Tell me everything." Chief Intelligence Officer Xylara stepped forward, her crystalline form catching the light. "General Anthony Marshall, Your Majesty. Arguably the most brilliant military mind humanity has produced. He's responsible for the successful defense of the Proxima Centauri colonies and the strategic victory at the Battle of Titan. His tactics are unconventional, but extremely effective. And his personal life?" Azrael's question carried a dangerous edge. Xylara hesitated before continuing. "He has one child, Your Majesty. A son named Ethan, age 10. The boy's mother died during a pirate raid on one of Earth's outer colonies 3 years ago." A slow smile spread across Azrael's face, revealing rows of metallic teeth, a sign of his cybernetic enhancements. "Perfect." High Counselor Verthak's tentacles ceased their movement. "Your Majesty, surely you're not suggesting—" "I am not suggesting anything, Counselor," Azrael's voice cut through the chamber like a plasma blade. "I am declaring my intent. These humans need to understand the cost of defiance. They pride themselves on their emotional connections, their family bonds. Let us use that against them." The council chamber fell silent. Even the most hardened members of the Galactic Council understood the gravity of what their emperor was proposing. Taking a child, especially the child of a military leader, crossed a line that had remained sacred even in the bloodiest of galactic conflicts. "Your Majesty," Xylara ventured, her crystalline form dimming slightly, "the human's response to such an action would be extreme. Our psychological profiles indicate that harm to children is one of their few universal taboos." Azrael rose from his throne, his towering form casting a shadow across the chamber floor. "Extreme? What do we have to fear from them? They are children themselves in the cosmic scale. Their entire civilization has existed for less time than I have ruled this empire." He descended the steps of his dais, each footfall echoing in the silent chamber. "We have tried diplomacy. We have tried economic pressure. We have even tried limited military engagement. Yet still they expand, still they resist, still they refuse to acknowledge their proper place in the galaxy." Reaching the center of the chamber, Azrael activated the main holographic display, showing a real-time view of Earth and its colonies. "The time for subtle approaches has passed. We will take the boy, and we will execute him publicly. Let General Marshall and all of humanity witness the price of defiance." The council members exchanged worried glances, but none dared to voice further opposition. Azrael's word was law, and his decisions, once made, were irreversible. "Prepare a strike team," he commanded. "I want this done quickly and cleanly. And ensure our broadcasting systems are ready for a galaxy-wide transmission. I want every human colony, every outpost, every ship to witness this moment." As the council members filed out of the chamber, Lara remained behind, her crystalline form pulsing with concern. "Your Majesty, there is one more thing you should know about General Marshall. Our deep psychological analysis suggests that his response to personal loss is unique." Azrael turned to face her, his cybernetic eyes glowing faintly in the dimming light. "Explain." "Most humans respond to grief with immediate, explosive anger followed by a period of depression and eventual acceptance. Marshall is different. When his wife died, he showed no immediate reaction. Instead, he spent 3 months meticulously planning and executing a campaign that completely eradicated the pirate confederation responsible for her death. Not just their ships and bases, he systematically destroyed their supply lines, their allies, their hidden accounts. He left nothing. The Emperor waved his hand dismissively. An impressive display of vengeance, but ultimately meaningless. The pirates were disorganized criminals. We are the Galactic Council. Our power spans thousands of systems. Our technology is centuries beyond Earth's capabilities. Lara's form dimmed further. "As you say, Your Majesty. I only thought you should be aware. Your concern is noted, Intelligence Officer. Now, carry out my orders." As Lara left the chamber, Azrael returned to his throne, satisfied with his decision. Soon, humanity would learn its place in the galaxy. Soon, they would understand the futility of resistance. But as the last rays of sunlight faded from the chamber, a small part of him remembered an ancient saying from his own species: "Beware the quiet ones, for their rage builds like a supernova, silent until it destroys everything in its path." In the days that followed, the Galactic Council's most elite stealth operators moved into position. Their ships, equipped with the most advanced cloaking technology in the galaxy, slipped past Earth's defensive networks like ghosts through walls. Their target, a prestigious military academy on Mars, where young Ethan Marshall attended school. The operation was executed with surgical precision. In the middle of the night, as the dome-covered Martian city slept, they struck. The boy never had a chance to scream. One moment he was sleeping peacefully in his bed, the next he was aboard a council ship, bound for Nexus Prime. As the ship entered hyperspace, its commander sent a brief message to Emperor Azrael: "Package secured." Proceeding to designated coordinates. The Emperor smiled as he read the message. Soon, very soon, humanity would learn the true meaning of power. And General Anthony Marshall would learn the price of defiance. The price of arrogance. General Anthony Marshall stood in his private quarters aboard the Earth Defense Force flagship, Resilient, staring at the last family photo taken before his wife's death. His fingers traced the image of young Ethan's smile, a smile that had somehow survived the loss of his mother. The emergency alert that had pulled him from a strategic planning session still flashed on his desk terminal: Priority Alpha, security breach at Armstrong Academy, Mars. His comm unit chirped. "General," Colonel James Turner's voice was tight with tension. "We've confirmed it. The intruders were council operatives. They took Ethan." Marshall's hand didn't tremble as he set down the photo. His voice remained steady as he replied, "Understood. Call an emergency meeting of the Joint Chiefs. And James, activate Protocol Omega." There was a pause on the other end. Protocol Omega was a contingency plan so classified that only 5 people in the entire Earth Defense Force knew of its existence. It had been developed in secret over the past 3 years, ever since the death of Marshall's wife had opened his eyes to humanity's vulnerabilities. "Sir, are you sure? Once we initiate Omega, there's no going back." They took my son, James. Everything we predicted, everything we prepared for, it's happening now. Execute the protocol. The next 12 hours passed in a blur of activity. As Marshall coordinated with Earth's military leadership, reports flooded in from across the galaxy. The Council's ships had been spotted entering hyperspace with their precious cargo. Diplomatic channels fell silent. The galaxy held its breath, waiting to see what would happen next. Then came the broadcast. Emperor Azrael's face appeared on every screen across human space, his cybernetic eyes gleaming with triumph. People of Earth, his voice dripped with condescension, for too long, you have resisted the natural order of the galaxy. You expand without permission, develop technologies without oversight, and defy the authority of the Galactic Council. Today, you will learn the price of such defiance. The camera panned to reveal young Ethan Marshall, standing before a window that showed the 3 sons of Nexus Prime. The boy's face was pale but composed, his father's strength evident in his steady gaze. This child, Azrael continued, is the son of your supreme military commander, General Anthony Marshall. His execution will serve as a reminder of the Council's absolute authority. In his war room aboard the Resilient, Marshall watched without expression as Azrael approached his son. Around him, his officers stood in horrified silence, some with tears streaming down their faces, others with fists clenched in helpless rage. Do you have any last words, child? Azrael's voice was almost gentle. Ethan Marshall lifted his chin, his eyes finding the camera. Dad, his voice was clear and strong, remember what Mom always said. Sometimes the stars have to die to birth something new. Then it was over. Quick, clean, almost elegant in its brutality. Azrael turned back to the camera, satisfaction evident in his metallic smile. Let this serve as a lesson to all who would defy the Council's will. We are eternal. We are absolute. We are. The broadcast cut off abruptly. In the war room, Marshall's officers turned to their general, expecting to find him broken, grieving, or consumed by rage. Instead, they found him already in motion, his fingers flying across his tactical display. Sir. Colonel Turner approached cautiously. What are your orders? Marshall's response chilled everyone in the room. Execute Phase 1 of Protocol Omega. Activate all sleeper agents. Transmit authorization code, Phoenix Rising. Across the galaxy, hidden agents embedded in every level of Council society received their activation signals. Years of deep cover work, initiated after the death of Marshall's wife, were about to bear fruit. These weren't just spies, they were highly trained operatives who had spent years gaining access to critical Council infrastructure. Within hours, reports began flooding in. Council communication networks experiencing mysterious failures. Navigation buoys across major hyperspace routes malfunctioning. Security systems in key facilities suffering unexpected crashes. Small issues individually, but together they formed a pattern that only the most astute Council analysts would recognize, and by then, it would be too late. Meanwhile, in a secure facility deep beneath the Martian surface, Dr. Sarah Chen, Earth's leading quantum physicist, received her own activation code. She stood before a massive device that hummed with barely contained energy, the product of 3 years of secret development. Begin final calibration sequence, she ordered her team. Project Prometheus is now active. The device's hum grew louder as its quantum core began to spin up. This was humanity's ace in the hole, technology that even the Council, with all its centuries of advancement, had never managed to develop. They had dismissed humanity as primitive, never realizing that their primitive minds might approach problems from angles the Council had never considered. Back aboard the Resilient, Marshall opened a secure channel to Earth's President and the Joint Chiefs. Protocol Omega is in effect, he reported. Phase 1 is proceeding as planned. Request authorization to proceed with Phase 2. The President's face was grim. The Security Council's vote was unanimous, General. You have full authorization. God help us all. Marshall nodded once, then turned to his staff. Send the following message to all Earth forces: Operation Starfall is now active. This is not a retaliatory strike. This is not a punitive action. This is humanity's declaration of independence from Council authority, and we will accept nothing less than total victory. As his officers rushed to comply, Marshall allowed himself one moment of private grief. He touched the photo of his son one last time, then secured it in his uniform pocket, close to his heart. They thought killing you would break us, son, he whispered. Instead, it will be the spark that burns their empire to ash. Across human space, a massive military machine began to move. Ships emerged from hidden shipyards, bearing weapons and technology that the Council's intelligence had never detected. Soldiers donned advanced armor that incorporated principles of physics the Council had deemed impossible. And deep beneath Mars, Dr. Chen's quantum device continued its ominous countdown. The Council was about to learn that humanity's apparent submission over the past 3 years had been an illusion. Every defeat they had inflicted, every restriction they had imposed, had only served to mask humanity's true preparations. Marshall had used their own arrogance against them, letting them believe they were in control while he methodically positioned every piece for this moment. In his private quarters, Marshall opened a secure file on his terminal, the complete details of Protocol Omega. Its contents would have shocked even his closest advisors. The protocol wasn't just a military response, it was a comprehensive plan to dismantle the entire Council power structure. Every weakness, every vulnerability, every potential point of failure in their supposedly invincible empire had been identified and targeted. And it all began with a simple truth that Azrael had failed to understand: humanity's greatest strength wasn't their technology, their resources, or their military might. It was their ability to unite in the face of tragedy, to transform grief into resolve, and to rise stronger from every attempt to break them. Phase 2 was about to begin, and with it, the galaxy would learn the true meaning of humanity's potential. The first strike. High Counselor Verthak burst into Emperor Azrael's private chambers, his tentacles writhing with unprecedented agitation. Your Majesty, we have a situation. Multiple situations, actually. Azrael barely looked up from his tactical display, where he had been admiring the new fear-inspired compliance from several human colonies. What is it now, Counselor? Surely the humans aren't already. We've lost contact with the Centauri Gateway, Verthak interrupted, a breach of protocol that spoke to his panic. And the Arcturus Defense Network. And the Sirius Monitoring Station. We're getting reports of simultaneous system failures across our entire infrastructure. Now Azrael looked up, his cybernetic eyes narrowing. Impossible. Our systems are completely isolated. No external force could. Another council member rushed in, this one's crystalline form pulsing with alarming patterns. Your Majesty. Our quantum communications network just went dark. All of it. Simultaneously. Azrael rose from his seat, his confident demeanor finally showing cracks. What about our backup systems? They're responding, but... The crystalline counselor's form flickered with uncertainty. The data they're receiving makes no sense. It's as if our own network is feeding us contradictory information. Deep in the heart of council space, aboard an unmarked station that officially didn't exist, Dr. Sarah Chen's quantum device pulsed with otherworldly energy. The device, nicknamed Prometheus by its development team, was the culmination of a scientific breakthrough that the Council had deemed theoretically impossible. Phase 3 quantum entanglement achieved, one of her technicians reported. The Council's network is completely compromised. They're blind, deaf, and talking to themselves. Chen allowed herself a small smile. Initiate Protocol Babel. Let's see how their mighty empire functions when none of their systems can talk to each other. Back on Nexus Prime, Emperor Azrael was facing a rapidly deteriorating situation. Reports of malfunctions and system failures were pouring in faster than his staff could process them. But these weren't random failures, they were precisely targeted strikes against critical infrastructure that few outside the council even knew existed. How, he demanded, pacing his chamber. How could they have known about these systems, let alone gained access to them? Intelligence Officer XY Lara, who had been quietly analyzing the pattern of attacks, felt her crystalline form grow cold with realization. Your Majesty, these aren't external attacks. The systems are being compromised from within. Before Azrael could respond, a new hologram materialized in the center of the chamber, General Anthony Marshall himself. His image was calm, composed, and carried an air of absolute certainty that sent chills through even the most hardened council members. Emperor Azrael, Marshall's voice was conversational, almost friendly. I believe it's time we had a proper discussion about the future of galactic governance. Azrael's face contorted with rage. How dare you? How dare I? Marshall's interruption was soft but carried enough weight to silence the Emperor. You took my son, Azrael. Did you think that was the end of the story? Did you really believe that humanity's most senior military commander wouldn't have contingency plans for such an act of aggression? The general's image gestured, and suddenly the chamber's displays were filled with data, classified council information, secret installation locations, personal files of high-ranking officials. For 3 years, we've been preparing for this moment. Every time you pushed us back, we adapted. Every restriction you imposed became an opportunity to infiltrate your systems. Every defeat you inflicted allowed us to place more sleeper agents in your infrastructure. Across council space, those agents were now active. Council military vessels suddenly found their weapon systems locked out. Defense platforms turned on their own installations. Communication networks dissolved into chaos as contradictory orders flooded every channel. This is impossible, Azrael whispered, watching his empire's carefully constructed systems tear themselves apart. Your technology is inferior. Your civilization is barely space-capable. Marshall's smile was cold. We let you believe that. Just like we let you believe your networks were secure, your secrets were safe, and your power was absolute. The truth, Emperor, is that humanity's greatest weapon isn't our technology, it's our capacity for adaptation and our long memory for those who wrong us. In orbit around Mars, the Earth Defense Fleet was mobilizing. But these weren't the primitive ships the Council had faced before. Hidden shipyards had produced vessels incorporating technology that the Council had never imagined possible, because they had never imagined approaching physics the way human scientists had. Dr. Chen's quantum device had proved that the Council's understanding of reality itself was incomplete. Their rigid, hierarchical thinking had blinded them to possibilities that human creativity had unlocked. Now, those possibilities were about to be unleashed. Your Majesty, a junior officer interrupted, their form trembling. We're detecting massive energy signatures throughout human space. They're opening stable wormholes. Hundreds of them. But that's beyond their technological level. Marshall's hologram smiled again. Did you really think we showed you everything we were capable of? You saw what we wanted you to see. You believed what we wanted you to believe. And now. The hologram expanded, showing real-time footage of Earth ships emerging from wormholes throughout Council space. Each vessel was equipped with weapons and defenses that shouldn't have been possible according to Council understanding of physics. Now, Marshall continued, you're about to learn what humanity is truly capable of when united by grief and purpose. This isn't just revenge for my son, Azrael. This is humanity's response to generations of Council oppression. You wanted to teach us our place in the galaxy. We're about to show you exactly where that place is. Azrael's chambers erupted in chaos as reports flooded in. Earth forces were striking simultaneously at dozens of critical Council installations. But they weren't just attacking, they were executing precisely coordinated strikes that suggested intimate knowledge of Council defensive protocols. How long? Azrael demanded, turning to Xylara. How long have they been planning this? The intelligence officer's response was interrupted by Marshall's hologram. Since the day you killed my wife, Emperor. That was your first mistake, showing us that the Council would target civilians. Everything since then has been preparation for this moment. My son's death wasn't your demonstration of power, it was your final test of our resolve. As if to emphasize his words, new alarms blared throughout the Council complex. The quantum shields protecting Nexus Prime, technology that the Council had believed unique to their civilization, were failing, compromised by protocols that had been hidden in their control systems for years. Marshall's voice carried the weight of humanity's collective determination as he delivered his final message: you chose to make this personal, Azrael. Now watch as your empire crumbles, not through brute force, but through the careful exploitation of every weakness your arrogance created. The game wasn't won today, it was won 3 years ago, when you gave us the motivation to begin dismantling your power piece by piece. As the hologram faded, Azrael was left staring at the chaos unfolding across his empire, finally understanding that he hadn't been dealing with a primitive species learning to reach for the stars. He had been facing an enemy that had turned their technological disadvantage into an opportunity to innovate beyond the Council's rigid expectations. And now, that enemy was about to demonstrate just how costly his miscalculation had been. Empires fall. The quantum shields protecting Nexus Prime collapsed with a silent flash that illuminated the planet's 3 suns. In the Council's primary defense control center, alarms blared as operators frantically tried to restore their supposedly impregnable defenses. Impossible, muttered Chief Defense Coordinator Zextal, his scaled hands flying over control surfaces. The quantum matrices are completely destabilized. It's as if they're being unwritten from existence itself. On Mars, Dr. Sarah Chen watched streams of data flow across her displays as Project Prometheus rewrote the laws of physics in localized space. The Council never understood, she explained to her team. They saw quantum mechanics as a set of unchangeable rules. We saw it as a conversation with reality itself. The device hummed with otherworldly energy as it generated quantum interference patterns that literally rewrote the fabric of spacetime. Council technology, based on their understanding of quantum principles, was helpless against weapons that operated on completely different paradigms. Aboard the Earth Defense Force flagship, Resilient, General Marshall stood at the command center, watching tactical displays as humanity's forces struck simultaneously across Council space. Each target had been carefully chosen years ago, each strike team had trained specifically for their objective, and each weapon had been designed to exploit specific weaknesses in Council defenses. Sir, Colonel Turner reported, Phase 3 is complete. All primary targets are exposed. Shall we proceed with Phase 4? Marshall touched the photo in his breast pocket, his last image of Ethan. Proceed, Colonel. And patch me through to all Earth forces. As Turner complied, Marshall's voice carried across every human ship and installation in the galaxy, this is General Marshall. 3 years ago, the Council taught us that they would target our families. Today, we teach them the cost of that lesson. Execute Phase 4. Show no mercy. Across Council space, humanity's true military might was revealed. Ships emerged from wormholes, bearing weapons that defied Council understanding. Ground forces materialized inside supposedly secure facilities, using teleportation technology that the Council had deemed impossible. And through it all, Project Prometheus continued its work, unraveling the quantum foundations of Council power. In his private chambers, Emperor Azrael watched his empire crumble with growing horror. Reports flooded in of installations falling, fleets being disabled, and defensive systems turning against their operators. But it was the precision of the attacks that truly terrified him. Every strike targeted a critical weakness that shouldn't have been known to outsiders. Your Majesty, High Counselor Verthak burst in, his tentacles writhing in panic. The humans, they're not just attacking our military installations. They're targeting our cultural centers, our historical archives, our They're dismantling us, Lara interrupted, her crystalline form pulsing with realization. This isn't just a military campaign. They're systematically erasing every foundation of our power. And they're doing it with our own security codes. Azrael's cybernetic eyes flared with rage. Launch the Omega fleet. All of it. I want every human world burned too. I'm afraid that won't be possible, Emperor, a new voice interrupted. Every screen in the chamber lit up with the face of Dr. Sarah Chen. Your Omega fleet's quantum cores have already been compromised. In fact, they're about to demonstrate some rather interesting properties of multidimensional space. As if on cue, reports began arriving of the Council's mighty Omega fleet, their most powerful military force, suffering catastrophic drive failures. Ships vanished into dimensional rifts, their quantum engines turned into weapons against themselves. But humanity's vengeance wasn't limited to military targets. Throughout Council space, carefully placed agents began broadcasting proof of the Council's centuries of manipulation and oppression. Species that had been kept in careful isolation learned of their artificial constraints. Civilizations that had been deliberately held back discovered the truth of their stunted development. The Council hadn't just made an enemy of humanity, they had given humanity the motivation to expose and dismantle their entire system of control. In the midst of the chaos, Marshall led a specially trained team on a personal mission. They materialized directly inside the Council's most secure facility, the Hall of Ascension, where the Council's highest secrets were kept. But Marshall wasn't there for the secrets. "Hello, Emperor," Marshall's voice was calm as he stepped into Azrael's private sanctuary. The Emperor spun to face him, cybernetic weapons deploying from his enhanced form. "How dare you enter this sacred place?" Azrael raged. "You primitive, emotional. Sacred?" Marshall's laugh was cold. "You talk of sacred after executing a child? No, Azrael. You proved there's nothing sacred to the Council except power. And now, you're going to learn what real power looks like." The Emperor launched himself at Marshall, his cybernetic enhancements making him a blur of motion. But Marshall didn't move. Instead, he pressed a small device on his wrist, and Azrael's attacks passed right through him. "Quantum phase shifting," Marshall explained conversationally. "One of many technologies we developed while you thought we were struggling with basic space flight. We learned to think differently, to see possibilities your rigid hierarchy couldn't imagine." Azrael snarled and activated his most powerful weapons, planet-killer tech built into his very form. But again, nothing happened. "Wondering why your improvements aren't working?" Marshall asked. "Look around you, Emperor. Really look." For the first time, Azrael noticed the subtle wrongness in the air. Reality itself seemed to be shifting, rules he had taken for granted no longer quite applying. "What have you done?" he whispered. "We learned to talk to reality itself," Marshall replied. "Project Prometheus doesn't just affect technology, it changes the fundamental laws of physics in localized space. Right now, you're standing in a bubble where quantum mechanics work differently. Your weapons, your enhancements, your very understanding of how the universe works, it's all wrong here." As if to demonstrate, Marshall stepped forward and casually deactivated Azrael's cybernetic systems with a wave of his hand. The Emperor collapsed, his enhanced form suddenly nothing more than dead weight. "I'm not going to kill you," Marshall continued, looking down at the fallen Emperor. "Death would be too quick, too kind. Instead, you're going to live to see everything you built torn down. You're going to watch as every species you oppressed rises up with our help. You're going to witness the end of not just your empire, but the very idea that any one species has the right to control the development of others." Around them, the Hall of Ascension's quantum-locked archives were being systematically downloaded and decoded. Every secret, every manipulation, every crime the Council had committed over the millennia was being prepared for galaxy-wide broadcast. "My son died believing in humanity's potential," Marshall said softly. "His death didn't break us, it showed us exactly what we needed to become. You thought you were punishing one man's defiance, but instead, you gave an entire species the motivation to surpass you in every way. As Marshall turned to leave, Azrael managed to croak out one last question: how? How did you hide all of this from us? Marshall paused at the doorway. We didn't hide our advancement, Emperor. We hid our potential. You saw exactly what you expected to see, a young species struggling with basic technology. Your own arrogance blinded you to the possibility that we might approach problems differently, that we might discover principles your civilization had never imagined. He touched the photo in his pocket one last time. You killed my son to teach humanity its place in the galaxy. Congratulations, Emperor, you succeeded. You just didn't understand what that place would be. As Marshall walked away, leaving the fallen Emperor to witness the collapse of his empire, the galaxy was already changing. The Council's carefully maintained order was being replaced by something new, an alliance of species united not by force or fear, but by the shared desire for true independence. And at the heart of it all, Project Prometheus continued its work, rewriting the very laws of reality to ensure that no empire would ever again have the power to dominate others as the Council had done. The age of the Council was over. The age of humanity had begun. A new dawn. 1 year after the fall of the Galactic Council, the great chamber that had once housed Emperor Azrael's throne stood transformed. Gone were the shadows and imposing architecture designed to intimidate. In their place, natural light streamed through newly installed windows, illuminating a circular table where representatives from dozens of species gathered. General Anthony Marshall stood at one of the chamber's viewing windows, watching the 3 suns of Nexus Prime set. The planet that had once been the seat of oppression was now the center of a very different kind of galactic organization, the Interstellar Alliance of Free Peoples. The Draconians have signed the accords, Colonel James Turner reported, approaching his old friend. That makes 37 species now committed to the new coalition. Marshall nodded, his eyes still on the horizon. And the former Council worlds? Still adjusting. Dr. Chen's team is helping them adapt their technology to work without reliance on the quantum principles we redistributed. Turner chose his words carefully, still amazed at how completely Project Prometheus had rewritten the rules of physics in key areas of space. The past year had seen changes that would have been unimaginable under Council rule. With their quantum-based technology rendered obsolete, former Council species had been forced to innovate in new ways. Many had discovered, to their surprise, that their primitive neighbors had developed technologies that worked on entirely different principles. Any word from the containment facility? Marshall asked, referring to the secure installation where former Emperor Azrael and his highest advisors were being held. Turner's expression darkened. Azrael keeps demanding an audience with you. Says he finally understands something important about humanity. I'm sure he does, Marshall replied dryly. Amazing how clarity comes after losing everything. They were interrupted by the arrival of Dr. Sarah Chen, her usual lab coat replaced by the formal attire required for alliance meetings. General, the quantum stabilization of the Centauri sector is complete. We can begin implementing the new physics protocols whenever you're ready. Marshall turned from the window to face her. The affected species have been prepared? Chen nodded. We've provided them with the basic principles they'll need to adapt their technology. Many are already developing interesting innovations. It turns out that when you remove the Council's restrictions, these civilizations are remarkably creative. This had been perhaps the most revolutionary aspect of humanity's victory. Rather than simply replacing the Council's rule with their own, they had fundamentally changed how power worked in the galaxy. Project Prometheus hadn't just been a weapon, it was a tool for equalizing technological capability across species. By selectively altering how quantum mechanics functioned in different regions of space, humanity had effectively forced the development of multiple, parallel technological paths. No single approach could dominate, as each had its own regions where it worked best. The Alliance chamber is ready for you, sir, a young aide interrupted, reminding Marshall of his duties as Earth's representative to the new coalition. As he made his way to the chamber floor, Marshall reflected on the changes of the past year. The galaxy was messier now, more chaotic than under Council rule. But it was also more vibrant, with species that had been artificially held back for millennia finally free to develop in their own ways. The chamber quieted as Marshall took his place at the circular table. Representatives from dozens of species, former council members, once suppressed civilizations, and newly discovered societies, all turned their attention to him. 1 year ago, he began, his voice carrying easily in the acoustic space, "We gathered here to declare that no single species or group had the right to control the development of others. Today, we meet as equals to continue that work." He gestured to the holographic display at the center of the table, showing the new mapping of technological domains across the galaxy. Different colors represented regions where different physical principles held sway, creating a patchwork that forced cooperation and innovation. The Council's greatest error, Marshall continued, wasn't their cruelty or their oppression. It was their belief that there was only one right way for civilization to develop. They saw their quantum-based technology as the peak of possible achievement, never imagining that their fundamental assumptions might be limiting them. Around the table, representatives nodded. Many of their species had discovered or rediscovered technologies that worked on completely different principles once freed from Council restrictions. But we humans, Marshall allowed himself a small smile, were too stubborn to accept any single answer as absolute. When the Council tried to force us into their mold, we didn't just resist, we found ways to change the very rules they relied on. He touched the ever-present photo in his pocket, feeling the familiar weight of loss and purpose. They thought killing my son would teach us our place in the galaxy. Instead, it taught us that we had to fundamentally change how power worked in this galaxy to ensure no one could ever again do what they did. The chamber was silent, every being present understanding the personal cost that had led to this moment. Marshall's next words were softer, meant as much for himself as for his audience. "Ethan once asked me why humans keep pushing boundaries, why we're never satisfied with good enough. I told him it's because we can always imagine something better." The Council saw that as a weakness, our refusal to accept their version of perfection. They never understood that our greatest strength lies in our ability to imagine and create new possibilities. He straightened, addressing the chamber with renewed purpose. "That's what this alliance represents, not just a new political structure, but a new way of thinking about civilization itself. No single species has all the answers. No single approach is perfect. It's in the interaction between different ways of thinking, different approaches to technology and society, that true progress lies." As if to emphasize his words, the holographic display shifted to show the latest data from across Alliance space. Regions that had been technologically stagnant under Council rule were now hotbeds of innovation. Species that had been isolated were forming new partnerships, combining their unique approaches to create technologies that would have been impossible under the old system. "We're not here to rule," Marshall concluded, "we're here to ensure that no one ever can rule absolutely again. The physics protocols we've implemented aren't just about preventing the rise of another council, they're about forcing us all to recognize that there are always alternative paths, always new possibilities to explore." As the session progressed into discussions of trade agreements and technological exchanges, Marshall found his thoughts drifting to Ethan. His son had died believing in humanity's potential, and that belief had been vindicated in ways no one could have imagined. Later that evening, Marshall stood alone in the memorial garden that had been created where Ethan had died. The garden had become a symbol of transformation, its plants collected from worlds across the galaxy, each adapted to thrive in soil that bore the quantum marks of Project Prometheus. "We did it, son," he whispered to the evening air. "We showed them not just our place in the galaxy, but a whole new way for the galaxy to exist. Your death wasn't just avenged, it became the catalyst for changes that will ensure no child ever dies like that again." As Nexus Prime's 3 suns set, casting the garden in multiple layers of shadow and light, Marshall finally felt something he hadn't experienced since losing Ethan: hope. Not just for humanity, but for all the species now finding their own paths forward. The Council had thought they were punishing humanity's defiance. Instead, they had sparked a revolution that transformed not just the political structure of the galaxy, but the very laws of physics themselves. In their arrogance, they had created exactly what they feared most, a galaxy where their kind of absolute power was no longer possible. And somewhere, Marshall liked to think, Ethan was smiling at the irony of it all.